Hello everyone, it's Leela Chess here once again, and we've finally done it. We're going to look at the CCC11 finals between Stockfish and Leela Chess Zero. So this one was quite a big game, and here Stockfish is playing white, Leela Chess Zero is playing black. Again, 30 minutes on the clock each, 5-second increment. So let's sit back, relax, and let's just get straight into it. So the first book move was actually for Stockfish to play the move 1b3. And that's the end of the book straight away, and Leela responded with the move e5, seen quite a lot. So white plays bishop to b2, attacks the pawn on e5, black defends with knight to c6, and Stockfish continued with e3. Leela plays knight to f6, white plays knight to f3, and now two pieces are attacking this e5 pawn. So black is either forced to defend, but in this case Leela actually pushes it on to e4, which hits the knights on f3. And now Stockfish plays knight to d4. Leela has the option of taking this knight with knight takes d4, and white will probably respond with bishop takes. Play would continue d5 maybe, c4, d takes c4, bishop takes c4, and this has been seen in quite a number of games in my opening database. Play continues bishop to e7, knight to c3, both sides castle, and usually black hits with c5 and a bishop can come to e5. So this is just an example of what could have occurred in this position if Leela decided to trade knights. But actually she didn't. She developed her bishop to c5, and Stockfish now captured the knight on c6, and Leela recaptured with the d-pawn, opening up the queen and the bishop on c8. Now I think Stockfish played an unusual next move. I would have probably preferred to play d4 in this position, attacking the bishop. And if he takes d3, bishop takes d3, usually black can play bishop g4, queen d2, queen e7, castle, and maybe black could castle queenside in this game. So this is a very even position, and it's up for grabs for both sides. But I think you'll see what I mean. After d takes c6 was played, Stockfish played a very weird move, a3, in this position. So I had a little think about it, and I think Stockfish's plan is to play the move c4 followed by b4 and trying to hit out in this queen side really quickly. Perhaps also when white plays d4, this stops any bishop b4 checks. So I actually think a3 is a weird move for Stockfish to play, I'm not going to lie. And anyway, Leela continued her game with queen to e7, so developing. Stockfish develops bishop to e2, and Leela plays a very Alpha Zero style move here, h5, so gathering more space on the king side, and we'll probably most likely start pushing this pawn up to h4 and h3 and start undermining these two pawns on h2 and g2. As we see in the game, Leela does get a great attack. But after h5, this is attacked twice by the bishop and the queen, so I was thinking maybe white may be able to take this knight off with bishop takes f6. But I was wrong, because after queen takes, the queen hits the rook on a1. White can play knight c3 though, attacking two pawns once again. But after queen g6, black actually has everything under control and is now hitting the g2 pawn. And if white plays g3, black can play h5, and black actually has no issues in this position. So it makes sense that white wouldn't give up their black squared bishop for the knight on f6, so instead Stockfish actually played d4 here. So the bishop attacked, it retreats back to d6, and Stockfish plays h3, stopping any knight g4 ideas or bishop g4s. But Leela shuts down white's kingside with the move h4, and now his g2 pawn is rather weak. The pawn on e4 and h4 really limits white's chances of trying to promote these two pawns up the board. And g2 and f2 become very long-term weaknesses throughout the game thanks to these two pawns and this pawn structure. Saying that though, white does have a great queenside compensation. Stockfish played c4, preparing to play the move c5. So for this reason, Leela makes way for the bishop with queen to e6. For instance, if c5 here, there could be bishop e7, bishop c4 and queen f5. So black is still able to get away from this pawn chain and this bishop. But if we go back to the game, Stockfish actually played b4, preparing maybe c5 and queen b3. But Leela recognises the weaknesses on g2 and played a really good move actually. Don't think I would have actually seen this rook lift, but she played rook h6 preparing rook g6 to hit this g2 pawn. So white would be really foolish to castle into this and try and defend the pawn. Stockfish instead develops the knight to d2. And Leela plays rook to g6 to hit this g2 pawn. And again, white would be foolish to castle into this, so they played the move king f1 to defend the g2 pawn. And Leela followed in with queen to f5, threatening to play bishop to g3 and start hitting this f2 weakness as well. So white sidesteps this with king to g1. Now I guess a move like queen to g5 may have been possible in this position, but I think white can defend with moves like queen to f1, and this rook and queen do defend the position quite well. It's going to be very hard for black to break this position down. But Leela didn't play queen g5, she actually played bishop to e6. So just developing, preparing to castle queenside and get more pieces into the attack. Stockfish played c5 to hit out, and the bishop retreats back to e7. And in this position, Stockfish played bishop c3. And again, I think Stockfish played another very weird move. I'm not really sure what this move actually does. Perhaps it stops black from playing a5, but I don't really think Leela's going to go in for that. I think better is maybe queen c2, and if queen g5, white will play bishop to f1 to defend everything again. And bishop d5 was given by the computer to play, and maybe a4 for white. And I think white is still okay in this position. So after bishop e7, white actually played bishop c3, and again, I think it's a very weird move because now black plays knight to d5, attacks the bishop, and Stockfish just drops it back anyway. And suddenly black's got another piece into the attack with this knight on d5, and it makes way for a lot of pieces for this rook to move to f6. And the bishop actually has a few more open lines now, so this actually just really helped black out. So Leela continued, she played queen to g5, so finally she plays this move and attacks g2, threatening checkmate. And the point of this now is that if bishop f1, what would you come up with here, because black's actually just winning. So black in this position can actually play knight takes e3. The point is, after f takes e3, black plays queen takes with check. King h2 is the only move, and black will play bishop to g5, threatening bishop f4 check with a winning game. For instance, if knight takes e4, there's bishop f4 check, g3, and then rook takes g3. And there's no way for black to stop the rook moving backwards and checkmating the king. And if they take this off, then there's just queen g3 checkmate. So the only way to defend queen g5 in the game was what Stockfish played, which is rook to h2. But now we see this is an incredibly awkward and terrible rook. It's no better than a pawn at this particular moment. It's got no scope whatsoever and is really susceptible to an attack. I was looking at bishop takes h3, but actually I think white comes out better because white can play knight takes e4, and if queen f5, then white goes back with knight d2. If queen e6, bishop c4, there's b5, bishop a2, and bishop f5 is given. But now Stockfish actually thinks white stands better. I think it's just due to the fact that this rook has just opened itself up. So if I go back to rook h2 from white, I think it's very important for black not to rush the attack. And bishop f3 actually helps white out massively by getting rid of this pawn and opens up the rook for white. So obviously Leela didn't play this. She actually played the move f5, so supports the pawn on e4 and prepares this f4 break as well. But of course there is a downside to playing f5, and Stockfish spots it with bishop h5. So basically Leela has given up the exchange here. So she has allowed the rook on g6 to get pinned, but I suppose it doesn't matter too much because white rook on h2 is terrible anyway. Leela continued with bishop f6. Stockfish took this rook off with check. Leela recaptured, and Stockfish played queen to e2. So black's just given up the exchange, but actually I don't think it matters too much for black because the rook on h2 is abysmal and the bishop on b2 is no better. Suddenly black actually dominates the white squares and can be really patient in this game because they're just going to castle and everything's pretty much blocked up anyway. So Leela does indeed castle queenside and gets their rook into the game. Stockfish plays rook to e1, and Leela plays a6, so stops any b5 attempts from white and just locks down the position. Stockfish plays rook h1, so trying to get their rook into a better position, and Leela plays queen h7, just sidestepping the g file temporarily to push g5. And just going to launch a pawn storm on this side of the board, and there's not really a lot white can do about it. So Stockfish realises their knight on d2 is really misplaced, so they play knight to b1. Leela plays g5, and Stockfish plays knight c3, so trying to trade knights off the board. Leela just continues her attack though with rook to g8, and Stockfish trades pieces with knight takes, and Leela takes with the bishop. So I don't think the knight was any great loss for black really, because they've got the two bishops, they're dominating the white squares, and they're just going to launch these pawns up, and the king is pretty much trapped on a really awkward position with the rook on h1 as well. So in the game, Stockfish played king h2, but I was thinking maybe they could be more aggressive with a4, but still I think actually black wins the game. They can play g4, if h takes g4, black can continue with rook takes g4. If white continues rook h2, trying to defend g2, black can play queen g8, supporting the bishop and the rook. If king h1 to sidestep, black has moves like f4, and the white square bishop on d5 is actually doing a great job here, because if e takes f4, black follows in with h3. The point is, if white plays g takes h3, black has e3 with check, and if f3, there comes rook to g3, rook f1, bishop c4, queen takes e3, and black starts winning material with bishop takes f1. I should just say though, if black plays h3, white may be able to play queen to e3, because if h takes g2, there comes king g1. And after queen g6, it's not very clear how black wins this game from here on in, because the g2 pawn actually blocks black's attack. So I think what's clear from this position is black doesn't need to rush, they can just take the time. So a4 in this position may have worked, but Stockfish calmly plays king h2. Leela continued patiently though with queen to d7. Stockfish plays rook c1. Leela again is patient, just puts their king in a safer position, very similar to AlphaZero's style, king b8. So now black has no issues with their king. Stockfish plays bishop to c3, and Leela played the move b5. The point is, if c takes b6, there comes c takes b6. If white decides to take this pawn off though, then they can play bishop to d8 to protect b6. And if queen e2, black now has an excellent position for their bishop on c7 with check. If the king goes to g1, black can follow in with f4 and has a very nice attack, preparing moves like f3 and g4. So if queen h5, f takes e3, f takes e3, black can play bishop c4, and bishop e1, suddenly it looks really bleak for white. Black can follow in with queen d5 ideas, and if bishop f2, rook f8, rook c2, and then play moves like king to b7, and white's position is just on lockdown. This king can't really move out of this position, and this rook on h1 is terrible. For this reason, white didn't take this b5 pawn off the board. Instead, Stockfish played rook hg1. So finally they've got their rook untrapped from the h1 square, but now black piles in with g4, and they've got a lot to deal with. So g4 is a really aggressive move. Let's just see if white can take this. I think if white takes with h takes g4, black will obviously recapture. And then I think white should play rook h1, but actually bishop c4 is a big threat, attacks the queen. If it goes to d2, then black can play g3 check. And if they take twice, king g1, and black goes rook h8, if they capture twice, and queen e1 to hit the pawn, black plays queen to g4, and suddenly has a one endgame, because they can play queen h4 and queen h2 really quickly, and checkmate the white king. So back to the game after g4 from black. White can't take this. So Stockfish goes bishop to e1 to support f2. And again, Leela is just very patient, just plays queen to e6. And finally Stockfish does have some aggression in them. They play a4, attacking b5, but I don't really think it does much. Leela just plays king to b7 very calmly. Stockfish takes the b5 pawn, and black recaptures with the c pawn. And now I'd love to be in black's position, because I'd be thinking I'm just going to play c6. I could even relocate my bishop back to d8 to c7. It's just a great position for black to be in. There's not really much white can do. For instance, if white now takes on g4 with h takes g4, black will recapture with the pawn. Again, we've seen this rook h1, bishop c4 and queen d1. Black can play rook f8, and I've gone through this variation on the computer where black plays king to g1. So this is just to illustrate what black can do now. They can play c6, bishop c3, bishop d8, queen d2, queen d5, locking everything down. If queen d1, there's queen g5, rook c2, bishop c7, and black's just got all their pieces in an ideal setup. So this is just an illustration of what black could achieve. So g3 finally. And here actually rook takes c4 was given as the best move for white. So after b takes c4, there's queen e2 to defend the f2 pawn and the g2 pawn. Black plays g takes f2 check. The bishop takes, and black can play c3. After I've used the computer, rook takes h4 was given, but now black can play queen g8 and is going to try and queen this c3 pawn. If queen c2, then black can play rook takes f2. And if king takes, then play queen to g3 check, king f1 and queen takes h4. And this should be a winning game for black. So that was a rather complicated line I've just got into, but again it just proves the point that white can't actually start capturing this g4 pawn because it leads to a certain death. So basically white's just got to hold on. Stockfish continued with the move g3. Leela played a calm move c6, stops white from progressing on the queen side, and rook c3 was played. Now here I actually liked Leela's move. She played a5 in the game. I thought this was rather interesting. But actually rook h8 was also a really good move for black to play. Just shifting their rook over to the h file, because if king g2 now, black will play g takes h3, and if king h2, there comes bishop to d8, and the point is it's going to reroute to c7. The computer gives rook h1, but now black can play bishop c7, and the computer just goes back and forth with rook g8 and rook h1. Black can play rook g8 though, and after queen d2, black can play rook queen g6, and all the pieces are piling in on this g3 square. So Stockfish gives rook c1, but then rook g7, rook c3, h takes g3 finally, and then f takes g3. Black should play queen to g4, rook c2, and then bishop c4. And black is slowly but surely making some progress against white's position. They're completely dominating the white squares, and maybe black can even start playing moves like bishop to d3 or queen to f3 and start infiltrating the position even more. But again, like I say, I like Leela's move in this position. She played a5, and this really shuts down white's chances of progression on the queen side, because Stockfish continued with b takes a5, and now Leela just plays king to a6, and black has no ambition of taking this a5 pawn off. It's just to block the whole position up. So suddenly all of Stockfish's pawns are on dark squares, and this really limits this terrible bishop on e1. So Leela's just completely locked down everything, and now she can focus on the king side. And finally Stockfish does actually play h takes g4, and in the game Leela took this with the rook. But there was a nicer way as well to win this game. H takes g3 wins as well with check, because after f takes g3, black can play bishop takes d4. The point is, after e takes d4, there's queen h6 check, king g2 is forced, and black can play e3 with check. And if king f1, which is the only move really, unless you want to give up the queen, black can play f takes g4 and threatens to play rook f8 check. So if white takes this e3 pawn off, there's bishop c4 with check. The king can go to g2, but now comes queen h3, king f2, rook f8 check. And now white is finally forced to give up the queen. Black can continue with check, g takes, queen h2, rook to g2, and then play queen takes f4, king g1, queen f1, king h2, and take the bishop off. and now black has an easily won endgame. So certainly in this position h takes g3 was possible, using the open h file and this bishop on d5 to completely destroy white's defences. Leela continued with rook takes g4 though, and Stockfish played rook to g2. And Leela gets on with her plan of rerouting the bishop to c7. She plays bishop to d8, the king goes to g1, and the bishop is finally rerouted to c7. And these bishops are really rather menacing right at this moment. And I'll illustrate this now, because if, let's say white plays g takes h4, there will come rook takes g2, king takes g2, and black can play f4, preparing move f3, and white is now pretty much forced to take this off, otherwise they're going to get mated. So if he takes f4, there comes e3 check from the bishop. If f3, queen g4, and again this pawn on f3 is pinned due to the bishop. So bishop g3, bishop takes f4, and the bishop on g3 is now attacked twice. If this queen moves away, the f3 pawn is no longer defended, so king f1 is rather forced, and then just comes bishop takes f3. Rook takes e3 is given that she's the best move in this position, but then bishop takes e2, rook takes e2, bishop takes g3, and white is just absolutely losing this position, and black's going to win. So these two bishops are mammoths right at this moment. Stockfish plays queen to f1. Leela plays queen h6. Stockfish goes back. Here I was actually thinking maybe black can play h3, but I've got to be very careful as black, because now white just plays rook h2, and suddenly everything is blocked in, and there's no real way for black to progress right now. Of course Leela is an absolutely much better player than me, so she plays rook to g8 instead, playing very calmly. The king goes to f1, Leela plays queen g5. The point is this g pawn is now pinned, and black can take the g2 rook if it ever moves. Stockfish goes back with king to g1, and now plays the amazing move f4. This is really inspirational. So the point is, again, the g-pawn can't take this, and f3 is coming, so white's forced to play e takes f4, attacking the queen, but now bishop takes f4 comes, and again the g-pawn is pinned, and there's not a lot white can do. I went through one variation here where white played rook a3, but again Leela still comes out on top with queen g7, attacking the pawn on d4. If rook e3, the variation can continue with bishop c4, queen d2, and h takes g3. So here I was just looking at how black could progress if white just decided to flail around. So after f takes g3, there comes bishop g5, because now the rook on g2 is no longer pinned. If queen c3, black can continue with rook h8, rook takes e4, and actually play queen f7. Threatening to play queen f1 checkmate. Rook f2 to defend this, but now queen h7 attacks a rook on e4 and threatens mate on h1. Queen f3 defends both, but then comes bishop to d5, pinning the rook against the queen. If rook to e2, black can play rook to e8, and suddenly white's just losing everything. Queen h1 is actually given as the best move, but then comes queen takes queen, king takes, and rook takes e4, followed by rook takes e4, bishop takes, king g1, and black can clean up with bishop to e3, king f1 and bishop takes d4, has a nicely won endgame, and they should convert this. So rook a3 here was just demonstrating what happens if Stockfish flails around, but Stockfish played g4 in the game. Leela continued with the move e3, and now the bishop is unleashed on d5. F takes e3 is played, and rook e8 is played. The point is, there's no point taking this rook on g2 with the bishop. The bishop is a much better piece, and suddenly now white can't move this e pawn. If they do, if they play e takes f4 because the queen's attacked, black can actually finish up with rook takes e2, and if f takes g5 they can play rook takes g2. The point is, after king f1, black can play rook h2 and try and convert this h pawn to a queen. For instance, in this position, if rook e3, then black can play h3. If bishop c3, then comes rook c2, and black's going to convert this pawn down the board, because if rook takes h3, there's bishop g2 check. Also in this position, if king to g1, black just plays rook h1, and if king f2 they can play b4, and now they're going to convert one of these pawns. Play continued rook d3, and if b3, rook d1 to try and stop b1 from becoming a queen, but black can also play h3, and if g6, black is just actually in the nick of time in this variation with h2. If king g3, rook takes e1 is played, rook takes e1, black gets a queen, rook can take it and the bishop can take, but the point is after g7 the bishop is just in time to play bishop d5 and stop white getting a queen on the g8 square. So luckily this rook e8 move works out perfectly if white takes on f4. Stockfish actually played bishop f2 in the game though, and I think Leela was wise to retreat the bishop back to c7 to avoid this complicated variation of e takes f4. Stockfish played e4 now to block up the d5 bishop, but then Leela just takes rook takes e4. Stockfish went to d1 with the queen, and queen e7 was played. The point is that black wants to play rook to e2 and unleash the bishop on d5 once again. King f1 was played, so white's trying to give their rook some space. But rook f4, the bishop hits the rook moves to h2, and Leela retreats the rook back to f8. So again, the rook's now attacked by the bishop on c7. But now it looks as though Stockfish has just given up trying to protect their rook. I think it's because if rook h3, black can play the amazing move queen to e4 and start harassing with queen to g2, for instance. So after this rook f8 move where the bishop's attacking the h2 rook, Stockfish plays queen to e2, and Leela is happy to simplify in this position with queen takes e2 check. Queen f6 was also a possibility where the rook's still attacked and the queen and rook are ganging up on this f2 bishop, because if king g1, black has bishop takes h2, king takes h2, queen takes f2, queen takes f2, rook takes, king g1, and black can finish with rook g2, because after king f1 there's rook takes g4. But Leela decided to go for a different finish. She went queen takes e2 check, king takes, and Leela played bishop takes the rook. The bishop took on h4, and Leela played b4, and this is actually game over pretty much now for white. So they're material down, and it looks as though this b pawn is going to start running down the board. So rook c1, b3, Stockfish went bishop g5, and Leela played b2, and gets behind the pawn with rook to b8. Stockfish continued with rook king to d3, and here actually Leela could have finished the game off after king to d3 with bishop to a2, and if rook h1 they get a queen, the rook takes, the bishop takes, and that should be game, to be honest. But Leela decides to play with her food once again, so after king d3 she played rook to b3, the king went to c2, and the game continued with rook takes b2, rook takes g4, rook b6 check. And just for a second, black's got to be a bit careful, because if the king takes a5 here, white can play bishop d2 check, and it's actually a perpetual check. After king a4, white can play rook a6, king b5, rook to b6, king a4, rook a6. This would be a complete draw, and if I was a human player I'd be bloody annoyed if I'd lost or drew this game. So Leela is smarter than that though. She played king a7, and now Leela actually finishes white off. So bishop e3 is played, bishop goes back to c7. After king d3, Stockfish just lets Leela take the rook off with bishop takes, the pawn takes, and the king went to a8. And I'll just play through the last few moves quickly on the board here, because basically black should clean up this really quickly, but she doesn't. She takes a number of moves to do this. For instance, in this position, I feel like Leela could have just played rook e4 check, king g5 and taken the pawn on d4. After a few captures this would have been an easy win for black, but Leela didn't go for this, so she continued on with quite a number of moves for no reason at all. I'm not sure why she still does this, but eventually after a series of moves it actually goes up to a move 124. Eventually black wins all the pawns and tries to get another queen, but actually ends up doing a rook and king checkmate. And eventually this is how the game finished. Rook h5, checkmate on move 124. Bit unnecessary. She could have won a long time ago. But this was a great game nonetheless. A really good example of how to control your opponent. And it felt like Leela was some sort of human player here, because this is what a human would usually do against a computer. Just lock down the position and slowly grind away at the position. So anyway, this was quite a long game, so there's a lot of analysis here and it was rather complicated, so I apologise if I've missed anything, but please feel free to let me know in the comments and we can have a little analyse together if I have missed anything. But anyway, I hope I can do more of these CCC11 finals very soon, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Please drop a like, comment or subscribe if you haven't already, it really helps. See you next time.